12 o'clock, so we'll make a start now. We've got a few people still joining from the lobby, but we'll just get going now. Welcome to our monthly webinar, AI in Healthcare, IP and Commercialisation. Just to let you know that we are recording this session, and if you want to, you can watch it later on YouTube as well. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Fiona Schaefer, and with the help of some excellent guest speakers, we'll be exploring the topic of AI in healthcare and IP and commercialization and all of the issues around that. And apologies for rescheduling this. This was originally scheduled to run at the end of May, but we're now doing it this week instead. So as I said, we're joined by two guest speakers today. Delighted to welcome JD Blackwood, formerly of iCared, who is now the AI lead for NHS Forth Valley, and also Joanna Boag-Thomson, who is an owner and IP lawyer at Shepherd and Wedderburn. What we'll do, I'll do a quick introduction and explain the reasons why we're hosting this webinar today. And we'll then hear from our speakers, who will talk for about 15 minutes apiece, and we'll have a Q&A session as well. If you have any questions that you want to ask our speakers, please just do put them in the Q&A box, and we will try to get around to as many questions as we can. Just before we get going, though, a little bit about ourselves, for those of you who perhaps aren't familiar with who we are. InnoScot Health has been around for around 21 years now. We're the formal innovation partner for NHS Scotland, set up by NHS Scotland and Scottish Enterprise. And our aims and missions is to inspire, accelerate, and ultimately commercialise the good ideas, inventions, and innovations that NHS Scotland staff have. So regardless of what your role is in the NHS, whether you're a doctor, surgeon, nurse, physiotherapist, pharmacist, whatever you do, we know that you encounter problems every day. We know that you solve problems every day, and we know that you generate good ideas that can make a real impact to the world and really improve patient outcomes. We're publicly funded. We're part funded by the Chief Scientist Office. And our ultimate aim, as I said, is to protect the IP, protect the invention, develop it, and try and get it out there onto the market so that it can make a real meaningful impact to society, but also so that it can generate some revenue for NHS Scotland and for the inventor as well. Because if we can successfully commercialise an invention, the inventor gets a cut of that as well. One thing just to mention before we get on to our speakers, there are various ways you can contact us if you want to have a chat and learn more about what we do, or if you've got an idea that you want to talk to us about. You can go to our website, of course, or you can email us. But we also use a system called Calendly, which allows you to book a consultation with us online. So you can pick a time that's convenient for you and book a consultation, and you can speak to one of the team of innovation managers at InnoScot Health, of which there are 3 of us at the moment. So the background for this webinar today, and the reason why we're doing it, it actually came out of a couple of news stories that broke over the past year or so. The first one is one you might have heard of that came out it was a few years ago now, and it was about a photographer called David Slater, who was taking photographs of different sorts of apes and monkeys in the jungle. And at one point, one of the monkeys grabbed his phone camera off of him and managed to take a selfie, which actually turned out to be the best picture that he took the entire day. And that's the picture of it there. Naruto, the monkey, took a selfie. And there was a bit of controversy at the time about who owns the copyright for that, because David wanted to publish this and have it published in various sort of journals and papers and news articles. And you can go online and look. There's a good Wikipedia page about it, in fact, about who owns the copyright. And it turned out someone had made the point, well, perhaps, Naruto the monkey should own the copyright because, he actually created the IP. He took the image of it himself. He's the first author of it. And I think it was determined later, after a lot of debate, that monkeys can't own IP and can't own their own copyright. So it went back to David, but it caused a bit of controversy at the time. That then led on to a story that came a little bit more recently. Dr. Stephen Thaler, who is a researcher, and he tried to patent an invention that he created, which is a food container for devices and methods. And there's a little diagram of it there. It's got this kind of really quite clever sort of fractal shape so that it locks together and can stack easily. But the design of that was actually created by an AI program rather than he himself. And when he filed a patent application for it, he tried to name the AI as the inventor rather than himself. And again, it caused a bit of controversy and debate. And ultimately, I believe it was deemed invalid. Our speakers may be able to correct me on that, but I believe it was deemed invalid because a human is the only entity that can be an inventor on a patent application. You can't have AI as an inventor. So both of these stories kind of got us thinking. We know that AI in healthcare is a big and fast developing topic that interests a lot of people, and we know that it comes with a lot of intellectual property issues and aspects. So that's why we have our two speakers on today. And I'd like to start by welcoming JD Blackwood, who, as I said, is formerly of iCared and now the AI lead for NHS Forth Valley. Who's going to talk to us a little bit more about the healthcare side of AI and how to develop and roll out healthcare innovations that are based on AI. So I will stop sharing and I'll let JD share his screen as well.
Super. Thanks very much. Can I just check, first of all, that you can actually see my screen?
Yeah, we can see you. That's good.
Yeah, super. Excellent. So thanks very much, everybody. We sometimes think of AI as something that will happen to healthcare in the future, but it's not. AI is already being used in healthcare across Scotland. As far back as 2011, Scotland was the first of the UK screening services to use AI to replace the first reader in its diabetic retinopathy service. And virtually every board is using AI to measure paediatric bone growth. GGC are using AI in paediatric cardiology, as are, I'm sure, others. The Beatson Cancer Unit is using AI to generate dynamic radiotherapy treatment plans, and many boards have AI integrated into their imaging scanners to clarify or enhance pathology. On top of that, we're in the midst of a national procurement for an AI solution that could halve the door-in, door-out time for stroke patients and triple the number who will recover with no or only slight disability. And NHS GGC, based on the success of its research in COPD, is procuring a long-term conditions platform that I hope will incorporate AI. Now, we're gathering real-world evidence of the effectiveness and value of a number of AI products across the country. Ayrshire and Arran are examining AI to detect bone fractures. Grampian, GGC and Lothian are all examining a variety of solutions in lung cancer. Grampian is now infamously examining AI within the breast cancer screening process. And GGC is looking at heart failure, osteoporosis, discharge management, demand management, and radiotherapy planning. And the list keeps on growing, albeit pretty slowly. Now, the Office of the Chief Scientist is currently running 10 open innovation challenges delivered using the SPRI format. One of those is examining AI as a mechanism for triaging skin cancer referrals, and another will potentially examine the use of AI in systemic anti-cancer therapies. Now, this list hasn't changed that much over the last 3 years. So if you want to sell AI products to the public's healthcare system, you're going to have to understand that it's a long game. Now, we're quite fortunate to have a really good healthcare innovation ecosystem in Scotland. To begin with, we have regional and national data safe havens, and their equivalent for human tissue and related data, our regional biorepositories, that combined with the Scottish Medical Imaging Service and Research Data Scotland, can provide research access to a huge range of linked healthcare data. Now, the route to that data is typically through the research and innovation teams within the NHS, and they help academic researchers and innovators to generate knowledge and products using a combination of healthcare data and access to clinical or operational expertise. Our regional healthcare innovation hubs coordinate access to the wider ecosystem, and they are supported by government-funded innovation hubs such as the Data Lab, who host Scotland's AI Alliance, and DHI, who provide us with a lot of the user-centred design and lean service improvement expertise. And all of that is supported by rigorous science through Scotland's universities, where national priorities for scientific research are driven by the Chief Scientist Office. Clinical trials units across Scotland will design rigorous, safe and well-governed research studies, often patient-facing. And additionally, several universities have health technology evaluation teams who will assess the value of a health intervention so that we can make strategic decisions on where to spend public funds. Now, assuming we gather good evidence, then Healthcare Improvement Scotland, amongst other things, provide assurance of the work that we've done. And if we're lucky enough to get some inventions driven from the NHS, then of course InnoScot Health will help us commercialise those ideas and help take them through the regulatory approval process. The Innovation Design Authority helps direct our innovation priorities in healthcare, and if we have solutions that can be adopted nationally, then we have an accelerated national innovation adoption pathway supported by the Centre for Sustainable Delivery, which helps us scale across Scotland. Innovators are supported by our National Tech Scalers programme, and Scottish Enterprise will connect to funding and the investor ecosystem. AI solutions can be purchased through our dynamic purchasing system, and national adoption is supported by the NSS National Procurement Team. And finally, it's worth saying that we have several national systems which simplify the national deployment in some cases, and that's pretty unique. So let's talk about the process of taking your concept into this ecosystem and commercializing it. So a popular tool for business planning, and one that I've used in my own businesses, is the business model canvas from the company Strategizer. If you're thinking about commercializing your ideas, then this is where I'd start. The beauty of this tool is that it forces you to follow a logical, stepwise process, considering all of the elements that will make your business a success. Those elements are, of course, your customer and the way you sell and interact with them, what resources and activities you'll need to perform to build products and services and to run your business, what partnerships and supply chains you'll need to use, and what all of this will cost. But the most important element, and the reason it's right in the middle, is your value proposition. Your value proposition is the way in which your product helps customers get jobs done, reduces their pain, or helps them successfully achieve the objectives that are important to them. To design your value proposition, you must first understand your customer. And understanding your customer is unfortunately where many innovators fail, most commonly because they build solutions that either don't solve problems or don't have problems to solve. Now, your business needs value propositions that customers are willing to pay for, and a business model that allows you to provide it to them at a profit. So I want to talk today about the way you might do that within healthcare AI and some of the common pitfalls. Perhaps one of the most critical decisions as an innovator that you're going to have to make in healthcare is whether you're going to build a product that falls under the medical device regulations or not. A regulated software medical device will have a different, more expensive and more onerous commercialization journey than one that's not regulated. But if you want to achieve a clinical objective, then you'll need to begin that journey as soon as possible. Although the regulations differ in process across the international jurisdictions, they tend to broadly agree on the definition of a medical device. Basically, if you intend to use the product on a human to diagnose, prevent, monitor, predict, prognose, treat, alleviate, or compensate for disease, disability, or injury, then you're building a medical device. So welcome to the commercialization journey. Surprisingly few people who work in the innovation ecosystem, including a lot of innovators themselves, understand this journey. So hopefully I'll help you understand it a little bit better today. And if you can understand it, then you can plan for it. If you work in research already or the startup ecosystem, then you're probably familiar with the top part of this journey. So it begins with a brilliant idea. But if that idea is to take flight, you've got to back it up with a few basics. Understand and quantify the problem, who might buy a solution, and set out the strategy and the plan for success. You might even, if you're going to need regulatory approval, set up your quality and risk management systems, even at this early stage. Now you have to test whether the concept is actually feasible. So deeply understand the nature of the problem and confirm it's worth solving. Think about whether you can build a product affordably and if it's even possible to sell it. Even better, co-design it with the people you think it will help, that's your users, and the people you think will benefit, that's your customers, and think about how you'll protect this idea from competitors. Next, I'm afraid you're going to have to build something. Normally the AI model, because that's the core of your product. Get and understand the data. Start to think about how you make the product safe, transparent and fair, and think about generalizability, how you'll make it work in diverse populations and environments and across different customers. And once you've built something, test it, the preclinical validation phase. Be rigorous, transparent, reproducible, and inclusive. Use as much data as you can in as close to its raw state as you can. Compare it against the current standard of care in terms of safety and efficacy. And with your co-designers, start to explore and mitigate risk. Once you've done that, you might have something that you can package up and test in a real clinical environment. That's the productization phase. Understand how it's going to be deployed, used, and scaled up. Make the user experience exceptional and frictionless. And make sure you can plug it into the myriad of systems within the NHS using interoperable standards like FHIR. Doing so is effortless, and that you've complied with the information security and regulatory governance. Then test it in a clinical setting, the prospective clinical trial. Partner with people who are independent, objective, and skilled at generating robust scientific evidence in the NHS and in the clinical trials units. Choose a chief investigator who understands the problem, has time, and is committed to helping you. And measure the most critical qualities. Does it work? Does it work well? And is it safe? When it's ready, you'll be able to submit it for conformity assessment and market approval. And because you adopted a QMS and an RMS at the concept stage, you'll already have the documentary evidence on how you've designed, built, validated, and clinically verified your product. And you'll have the risk management plan to hand. The one thing I would say is that you should engage with the notified body, the organisation assessing your conformity to the medical device regulations, early and often. You might even engage it at a concept stage. So now you're on the home straight, you're preparing for market entry. Show real-world evidence of value and performance in a variety of environments using multi-site evaluations. Lean on health technology assessment experts who guide you through all the various definitions that a buyer might use for the concept of value. Then make sure your business is ready for market entry. You've defined a clear value proposition. You understand who's going to sell to and how. Buying is easy, deploying is easy, using is easy, and you build a customer-facing service function so your customers feel supported. Once you've deployed products, you'll have to run some sort of post-market surveillance program, monitoring the performance and safety of your product, reporting when there's a problem and resolving it quickly. That's a good idea anyway, to be honest, because the more feedback you can get, the better you can make your product. And finally, now that you have a foothold in the market, it's going to be time to scale. In Scotland, think about the national value case. Can this be deployed nationally? Build capability and capacity in your team to support diverse international markets, especially considering how you deploy products and support your customers. Now, it's always worth looking at the regulatory compliance aspects. At an early stage, you'll have to adopt a quality management system that complies with ISO 13485. That's the quality management standard for medical devices, and a risk management approach that complies with ISO 14971. That's the risk management framework for the medical device lifecycle. You may even want to consider adherence to a brand new standard for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving an AI management system, which is ISO 42001. Now, as you begin to use patient data, you'll need to ensure your process is in compliance with UK GDPR. And as you begin to go beyond the algorithm to product build, You'll want to be looking towards ISO 27001 for your security management system, IEC 62304 that defines the life cycle standards for your medical device, IEC 62366 that defines usability engineering standards, and maybe even a relatively new standard, BS 3440, that defines a validation framework for the use of AI in healthcare environments. And as you gather clinical evidence for regulated approval, you may have to comply with ISO 14155, which is the standard for clinical investigation of a medical device. And then, as we discussed a few moments ago, you want to comply with the medical device regulations in the jurisdiction of sale. Having a post-market vigilance and surveillance system is a requirement of the medical device regulations, and BS 2416 provides a framework that's consistent and integrated with ISO 14971 and ISO 13485. And it's worth briefly mentioning that depending upon the intended use of your device, you may have to comply with discipline or context-specific standards and regulations. For example, if you're deploying an AI software medical device in radiology, you may have to comply with the ionizing radiation regulations of IRMA. It's obviously going to be important to hire the right people at the right time on this journey. Right from the concept stage, you should start speaking to advisors from across the clinical, regulatory, technical, operational and research domains. The more you can validate the problem and your solution and prove that you've done so, then the more seriously you're going to be taken. As you enter feasibility, you absolutely have to onboard a clinician or other healthcare resource in the relevant field and engage a regulatory affairs expert if you've decided to go down that path. Now, building AI models obviously requires data scientists and AI engineers, but as soon as you start building any software, it's important to get strategic oversight from a chief technology officer. This and your other senior roles can be fractional for a while, perhaps a couple of days a month to begin with. But for any research and clinical evaluation, you'll need access to a trialist, a biostatistician, and preferably a project manager as your outputs ramp up and you need to start coordinating multiple work streams. Now, when building a product to wrap around your AI model, software engineers, testers, and service designers are going to be needed. It's a good idea to hire a product manager, and they'll be responsible for ensuring your product meets customer, regulatory, and compliance requirements. And since regulatory approval and real-world evidence collection is likely to require significant funding, and as you're approaching the point where you'll begin to sell products, you should think about a chief operating and financial officer and building up your sales and marketing team. And when you're ready for market entry, it's time to get your customer support teams up and running. Then as you begin to scale upwards and outwards, your partner and channel managers will be building your indirect sales channels. As a founder, fundraising is going to be part of your day virtually every day. The pre-seed stage takes you from concept development to early prototype of your product. And founders often bootstrap their companies with their own funds, or maybe money from family and friends. And in fact, investors are going to look for this as a signal that you're properly invested in growing a business. And whilst there are corporate and venture capital investment programs, they're pretty few and far between, and there's pretty heavy competition. Startup competitions, pitch events, incubators, accelerators, early stage public or charitable grants, they're going to be far more accessible. And you should expect to raise a maximum of about 500k in pre-seed. The seed stage focuses on building your prototype into a market-ready product, testing the market with your first users and customers, and validating the business model. It can be a pretty hard transition from pre-seed to seed, owing to the amount of money you'll likely have to raise. Some of the funding sources from pre-seed will still be available to you, but you'll probably want to begin tapping angel investors who believe in your vision and explore seed venture capital, corporate investment, and programs from large industry players. It's unlikely you'll be able to raise more than around 5 million at seed, with 2 million or less being the norm. And as you gain market traction with a solid product and what looks like an effective business model, you want to scale up your capacity and capability so as you can accelerate product sales and begin to add more products and services. Series A and B funding will typically have a lead investor, perhaps from your seed round, and it'll target venture capital and corporate venture capital funds with a view to raising substantial capital of double-digit millions to propel your business forward. Now, the number one pitfall for healthcare innovators is to fail to consider the customer. The customer is the person who buys the product, not the person who uses it. And that's a really important distinction. You've got to consider buyer motivations. If it's the NHS you're selling to, then it wants predictable, inexpensive, low friction, regulator approved, safe and secure technology. Making your product ready to buy means you have to meet these requirements. You also need to understand your customers' approvals and internal decision-making process. So it often requires a business case, which takes time, and the release of funds that are unlikely to be in this year's budget. The case is often made on your ability to save or avoid costs, especially in the current public sector financial environment, and to improve service outcomes. Remember that you'll also need people to advocate for your product, each with a different perspective. So in my experience, patients tend to focus on experience and outcome. Healthcare staff want you to save them time and to make things easier or better, whereas the NHS wants you to save them money and improve performance. It's crucial to understand how your customer buys things. So if it's the NHS, then it tends to buy through frameworks, like the dynamic purchasing system for artificial intelligence, managed service contracts, or existing call-off arrangements with cornerstone suppliers like InterSystems, Orion, Sectra, Microsoft, etc. Increasingly with AI, it's likely to be through platforms and marketplaces, but it can also be bundled with equipment or into other systems like your EPR, your PACS, or your LIMS. If you're selling to diverse markets, remember to diversify your commercial models to match. You'll probably need a B2G model for direct and framework sales to the NHS, a B2B model if you're going to go through intermediaries, and a B2C model if you're selling direct to consumers. And the most typical commercial models are good old-fashioned annual license and support fees, SaaS subscriptions, licensing per use, or even bundled with another larger product. However, in the current environment, there is no spare cash slopping around, so innovators might want to consider an outcome-based approach, where the upfront cost to the customer is very small or zero, and they receive their upside once savings have been made and outcomes achieved. So that's the safe to invest model. And finally, just a footnote really, innovators need to think about what happens when something goes wrong with a product or service, and make sure those risks are clear and insured. So just to finish off, I thought it'd be worthwhile to talk through the top 10 pitfalls of commercialising healthcare AI. You've seen the commercial journey. It's complex, long, it needs planning and resources. However, innovators often don't understand that and they get wrong-footed by it. When you start out, you can conquer the world with you, a techie and a laptop, but many fail to consider the full scale and diversity of resources required. You've come up with a great concept, the tech is super cool, but it doesn't solve a problem, so it won't be bought. Or you've got a product that solves a problem, but you didn't understand how it would be integrated into the clinical and operational pathways, so now it can't be installed. Innovators tend to be optimists, so you overestimate the value of your product, even in the face of evidence sometimes, and underestimate what it will take to deliver, and so run out of momentum and potentially cash. But they believe 100% in the product, and sometimes fail to gather enough evidence that it's actually going to work and deliver the benefits that they claim in the customer's environment. They thought about the user, but forgot about the buyer. So you've got a great product that's too difficult to buy. Or you built cool tech using the latest and greatest whizzy GPT thing, but you forgot to test that it's usable and scalable, so it falters when you sell to a big customer. A particular issue when private meets public sector is that you're unprepared to meet the information and governance, security, other compliance and regulatory burdens. So you're not really ready to sell your product when you think you are. And finally, almost as though Joanna has designed it this way, innovators often fail to protect their IP because they don't know how, or they think they can't because it's software, and they therefore fail to build a defensible position in an undoubtedly competitive market. Of course, if you're an innovator who's attending this webinar, then now you'll be able to avoid the pitfalls. And if you're part of the support ecosystem, you can now help other innovators to avoid them. Thanks very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, JD. That was hugely informative. I think we're going to be getting a lot of requests for those roadmaps actually as well. I've never seen it laid out like that, but that was a really useful tool as far as I'm concerned. And you're very, very right about the customer as well. Identify your customer is so important. So thank you for that. Any questions for JD, please put them in the Q&A. Moving on now, welcome our second speaker, Joanna Boag-Thomson from Shepherd and Wedderburn, who's going to talk more about the IP side of things, IP ownership, and how that relates to digital and AI. So Joanna, I'll let you share your slides and I will disappear again. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. Great to be here and very interesting to hear what JD had to say there. Can I check, are you able to see my slides okay?
Yes, that's fine. You can see that.
That's great. Good. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to rattle through this fairly quickly so that we've got time for questions. Quick recap on different types of IP. We've heard a little bit about it. You've got patents that last 20 years. You've got copyright, life plus 70 years, but in AI cases might only be 25 years or might not be at all. I'll come on to that. Design rights, database rights, all have finite periods. Trademarks are great because you can keep them going indefinitely. They last for 10-year periods. And if your IP is know-how, then that lasts for as long as it's kept secret. The other type of IP that's not truly intellectual property, but is really important in terms of AI, is both personal data and commercial data. So it's not strictly intellectual property, but very, very valuable in AI terms. Why is IP important? It's important to protect you. It's important if you're wanting to raise finance. Management team is absolutely key in raising finance, but intellectual property comes a pretty close second. Investors are always very keen to see patents wherever possible, but patents can be a very powerful disincentive to competitors, so it's great. You apply for a patent, you can mark things as patent pending. Some of the issues with patents are that they can be worked around, and of course not everything is patentable. And I'll come on just to talk a bit more about that. So Robert talked a little bit about Professor Thaler and the Debus patent. And this has really been testing the courts across the world. So there have been cases in the UK, the US, South Africa, Australia, and various other places. And in most places, the decision has been that where something is computer created, then it's not patentable, because the essence of a patent is that it needs a person to be the inventor. And an AI, however much we anthropomorphize them, is not a person. So that is where these patent applications have, for the most part, fallen down. Not in every jurisdiction, but certainly in the UK, they've fallen down. And I think the law is lagging behind. The Patents Act comes from 1977. The Patent, Copyrights and Designs Act comes from 1988. And it's taking a while, I think, for the law to catch up. So as I said, you need to have an inventor on it or an element of creativity. And there's a big question just now as to whether AI-generated inventions meet the tests. Now, a lot of AI is actually invented by humans or co-invented by humans. So in that case, I think there's a much better case to be made for patentability and for copyright protection. Just a quick note, some intellectual property protection can be very expensive. Patents are granted on a territorial basis. So you'll have a patent in the UK, you'll maybe have an EU patent, you'll have a US patent. And so you've got lots of different patent applications. There are ways of streamlining it, but it's expensive. And territories are also territory by territory and class by class. So you can look at the initial costs of these things, but once you actually extrapolate them, some of these costs can be really quite high. It can be really frustrating trying to get a patent. Often they won't protect pure software, but you will often get patents that will protect a method, a product, or a process with software as part of it. So don't assume that software can never be patented. It's technically excluded from patentability, but there are ways of getting patents. For the most part, copyright's not registrable, but there are some companies that will register copyright. The US is one of them, China is another. And again, think carefully about whether it's worthwhile spending the money on registering copyright because it arises automatically. When we're thinking about AI, we need to think about what we're actually talking about here. Is it an output? Is it a co-pilot? Is it a tool? What is the use case? You need to think about that because that has an impact on the intellectual property. But actually, one of the key queries in all IP in relation to AI is how has it been created? So if it's been created using LLMs, large language models, or scraping materials or scraping data, there is the potential for IP infringements and for privacy issues if the use has been unauthorized. So it's very important when you're creating an AI product, process, etc., to check that anything that you are using by way of an input is being used legitimately. And that usually is around contract terms. So for example, you may have a license for research purposes, but that license doesn't actually translate through to commercial exploitation. So you need to be thinking about this all of the time. If you're using open source software, this can have some unforeseen consequences because there might be restrictions on commercializing it, or there might be obligations to make code freely available. And in all of these cases, investors and customers will often want to understand the parameters to understand how you have developed this particular AI. And so you need to understand the legal side of it too. And so in terms of protecting IP, steps that you can register trademarks, and that is to protect your brand. So give your product a name and look at a trademark, and that starts you down the road to recognition. For copyright, assuming that copyright is available, and this again is about whether there's been a human who's been involved in creating the work. Put a copyright legend, a copyright notice down at the bottom, or when a product opens, etc. I've talked about patents. Again, these are generally speaking expensive, so you need to think carefully about your patenting strategy. What are you going to patent? When are you going to patent it? Where are you going to patent it? And if you disclose information before you apply for a patent, that can void a patent application. So you really need to think about keeping things confidential before you go into that registration point. For database rights, there's no registration, but they arise automatically, which is useful. Something I would say, though, is that data law itself is still very much in its infancy. It's a combination of IP rights and contracts. And generally speaking, contracts are king. And that's the point that I made in the last slide, which is you need to understand whether your use of input materials is legitimate use. And if you're going to enforce your IP rights, well, that's generally enforced through a court action. Having registered rights can be very useful. It tends to be much more of a deterrent to people. But first of all, try and protect your rights by using some of these elements that I've suggested here. And secondly, if you need to enforce your rights, then generally speaking, you're going to need a bit of financial backing behind you. So that was all I was going to say. I'm very happy to take questions, and I hope that's given you a bit of an overview of the IP in relation to AI.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Joanna. That's, again, hugely informative. I think a lot of people assume that software is never patentable under any circumstances, so it's good to hear that there are different cases and exceptions to that rule as well. So thank you very much for that. So we have time for some questions now. We've had a few questions come in. What we'll do, we'll plan to run for another 10 minutes and do a Q&A and wrap up, and we'll try and wrap up at about 10 to 1. So I might hand over now to my colleague, Fiona Schaefer. Fiona, I think if you've got some of the questions there to kick off with, please.
Okay, so to start off, oh, hold on. Again, okay, to start maybe with Joanna, in terms of, there is, do we think that there are going to be, what do you think are the main challenges going to be in actually harnessing that AI within healthcare, in terms of, there's obviously, it's quite complicated with lots of different, it's an ever-evolving environment in terms of AI and machine learning protection. I don't know how much you are involved with, or how much you've been brought in to be involved with those types of discussions about how you can actually harness that.
In terms of harnessing it, do you mean in a practical sense, or do you mean in terms of trying to protect it from an IP perspective?
Well, being able to protect it, but actually then to be able to use it.
Yeah. So people are almost willfully blind to some of this. People don't necessarily want to look at the background, but when we are doing due diligence, for example, for an investor, they will want to know where the inputs have come from and what the likelihood is of infringing somebody else's intellectual property and of them making a claim. So, for example, there are lots of cases just now. Getty Images against Stability AI has a number of cases running for unauthorized use of images. And so this is why I think it's important to try and work things out at the beginning. My own view is that in the cases that I've come across, so for example, where somebody, say within a university, has been using a research license for inputs, this is about a commercial discussion actually with the licensor. So quite often they'll be able to switch that to a commercial license. So there's usually a practical way of trying to deal with these things. People are not terribly keen to run off to court and take infringement proceedings. People are generally much more inclined to try and do some sort of a commercial deal.
Another question here is, so at the moment we're sort of, obviously both of you touched on, AI isn't capable of being recognized as the author in a number of cases, and it's still a bit of a grey area. Do you think that's going to move to going so that do you think that's going to change in the near future, that AI is recognized, or it's much clearer about how AI is recognized in terms of inventions?
So it depends if you come from the copyright side of things or the copyleft side of things. There are lots of different political views on this. It seems to me that there has to be some sort of a change to the law or a different interpretation of the law. And we're finding this in a range of different places. So for example, I do computer games work as well, and the law it's just not fit for purpose in that type of genre either. I think we'll wait for some interpretation, but there's a lot of speculation, particularly around computer-generated inventions. So in copyright, there is a specific copyright protection for something that's computer-generated, but people are asking, what does it mean when it says that the person who owns it is the person by whom the arrangements necessary for the creation of the work are undertaken, if there's nobody actually pushing a button, as it were. So we're either going to need the courts to do some interpretation, or we're going to need some legislative change, I think.
Would you like to add any of your thoughts, JD? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for me, it's a hideously complex area, and I'm glad that we've got Joanna to help us with these things. And it's going to become, I think, an increasing issue in healthcare. I think primarily because we are increasingly using artificial intelligence to do things like protein discovery, to design new drugs, and the questions are going to be asked. Who designed that drug? Was it the person who built the AI? Was it the company who used the AI? Was it somebody else? Was it the AI itself? We're doing a lot of invention in life sciences using AI, and we don't have an answer to it, but I suspect one of the very large conglomerates will be taking some of these things to court pretty soon.
But I think also sitting alongside that then is who has the liability if it's not right. So wherever you've got a right, you've probably got an obligation. So I'll be interested to see that as well. I think you're right, JD. But equally, there's that flip side of it as well on the liability side.
Yeah, absolutely. And liability has its own, issues. So I think increasingly we're seeing that vendors will build solutions using algorithms but want to offload the liability to the NHS. And as we increasingly use AI in the NHS, I think we've got to keep a very careful eye on the level of liability that the public sector is underwriting. But also we have to consider the fair exchange of value. If we're underwriting risk, then we should receive some sort of discount for that, or the product should be valued differently to assess the fact that actually it does a function, but most of the risk and management of its outputs go somewhere else.
We did have one question, but it kind of ties back into that. Do we know what the motivation is for really persisting in this, asking this question of whether, AI should be recognised? I guess we've kind of touched on that. Another point, which I can't quite see where I've seen it, was it came up on one of the screens, is are you seeing like concern or protections being put in place when AI tools are being used or discussed in relation to people's fear for their jobs, and actually it's it's going to replace roles, or do you see where it's more like to enhance? It's different perspective, maybe. Yeah, JD.
Yeah, I think there was a famous radiologist who once made the prediction that we should stop training radiologists immediately because AI would replace them in 5 years, and that was famously completely incorrect, unfounded, and foolish to have made such a projection. And I think if you look at the slide that I put up on the types of AI we're evaluating, we've been building medical AI since 1972, when the Mycin application was invented, and it's still not in routine clinical practice. If you look at radiology, I can buy a tool which looks at an X-ray and tells me if there are signs of lung cancer and maybe some other pathologies, but I would need to buy about 300 tools to do just the job that a radiologist does in reading chest images. So I think we're really far away from AI replacing clinicians. But I think it's absolutely true that the future is probably clinician plus AI. So, and almost every time you test AI, you'll find that it performs best when there's a clinician in the loop. And clinicians perform best when there's an AI in the loop. So it seems logical to me that you augment the human with AI, and steer away from any type of sales and marketing which suggests you can replace humans in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with that. And what I would say is the AI replaces tasks rather than roles.
Yeah, the AI, I often say it creates time. It's like a time machine. And what's interesting about creating time is that you then need to decide what to do with that time. And so actually one of the questions that's coming out is not, will it replace humans? But what can you do with the time that's created? And for organizations, the inclination is to immediately take that time and bank it as a cost saving, or to give even more work that's even more difficult to people. And I think you need to be very careful with that. And the right answer, I think, is to say, well, of the time saved, some of that needs to be banked, but some of it is an opportunity for the human being to do things that they wouldn't otherwise get the opportunity to do, to be creative, to do research, to progress their field. And I think that's a more interesting question for the future.
Great. Thank you very much, both of you, for that. Unfortunately, we do need to wrap things up now, I'm afraid. But thank you to everyone that put a question in as well. And apologies that we didn't actually get to those. First of all, I'd like to thank our two speakers today for joining us and giving us a really fantastic overview of AI and how it can be commercialized and rolled out, and the different sorts of problems you might encounter from an IP point of view, and the challenges and the things you need to be aware of. So thank you to JD Blackwood, and thank you to Joanna Boag-Thomson as well. Thank you to our audience for attending. I hope you found that useful and informative. This is a recorded webinar, so it will be on our YouTube channel a bit later on as well. Just to let you know before we wrap up, we have one more webinar in our series, which is next week, and that is about engaging students in healthcare innovation for an improved NHS. So working with students and academia to develop prototyping. We then take a summer break for a month or two, and we're back in August with a webinar about building a brand and identity. But thank you again to our speakers. Thank you again to our audience today, and enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thank you.